Well, guys, welcome to KingsCast episode 00. This is an exciting time for all of us. We've been talking about doing this for a while now, and we have finally the Monday after camp, where two of our folks are absolutely wiped out. They have been exhausted the whole time. I think once you get to camp, right, you ride a high for a couple of days, and then you immediately crash at some point. You sound terrible the rest of the week, present company included, and then you come back and everybody's expecting you to jump right back in and be happy-go-lucky.
Yes.
So, anyway, with that introduction,
Here we
for
go.
camp,
Here we go.
We decided that we would start a church podcast with two of our members exhausted and the other two. Mark, we had such a tough week. Because it was so quiet in here.
Right.
Yeah.
Got so much done.
I got Texas license plates and a Texas driver's license. So we've actually moved to the state now.
Let's go.
It only took almost a year, but I no longer have any fear of being pulled over now. I still speed excessively. No, I'm kidding.
Say by our neighborhood, you know what?
Yeah. Now that they've opened up Rod Field, they don't care
Right.
to stop people as much. But anyway, in the middle of all this that we've been talking about recently with Mark's sermon series called Late Bloomer, kind of a study of the character of Abraham and seeing how God is working through Abraham's life. Mark, in your sermon yesterday, you mentioned something that I thought was an amazing. It was an amazing coincidence, or maybe it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it was actually a spiritual thing. That you're talking about some of these holy places that Abraham has that we see kind of in his story, that we see kind of pop up every now and again. Would you be willing to give us just kind of a brief kind of review of that?
Sure.
Because I think that'll be a good intro into some of the things that I wanted us to be able to talk about today.
Yeah, I was looking through the story, and I believe yesterday, it was Genesis 15, and this is where God is coming and reaffirming His promise to Abraham, despite the fact that nothing's really happened yet. But one of the things that God brings up to him is how He's going to give him, this land. Your descendants are going to possess this land, and so I was reflecting some on just the value of a space, like who cares, right? Like, what's the big deal with a certain piece of land? And the direction that I went in thinking about the significance for Abraham is that knowing what we know now about Jesus is the one who's going to occupy this space. Right. And the events of Jesus' life, the events that lead to our salvation occurred in those spaces. And for that reason, it was very significant. But I also kind of went the direction of how I do believe each of us needs to look at the spaces where we live and work and do church and do friendship. We need to view those as if they are sacred spaces, because if we are open to the movements of God in our life, those are the very spaces where God is going to shape us. I mean, even right now here in this room, hopefully, Lord willing, God is at work in us and at work in the people who are listening to us. This here can be a sacred space if we are open to how God might utilize it.
Yeah. Justin, Krystal, did that strike y'all in a certain way? Had you heard of that before? Had you thought about that particular angle on what Mark was talking about yesterday?
Yeah, when I was in college, one of the things we talked about was matter matters, right? And like,
interesting. Yeah.
If not only to yourself, think about the other people, right? And so, like, for example, we just got back from Bandina. I've only been there twice now, right? Because I didn't go there growing up, but that place, I stepped foot on it, and I know that this is sacred ground for so many people. And so my job matters a lot. It matters a lot when leadership opportunities, to make sure that our students are engaging with God in a way that matters and entices discipleship back home, because of what that week means to every adult out there already.
Yeah. Krystal, what about you? Do you have the same kind of sense about a particular place?
Yeah, I think Colorado, it's like that was where we went to camp from Oklahoma. And one, it's just that beauty you can take in. It's one of those physical things you can see. Yeah. But one of the big things for me is that's where my walk really started to begin, right? I was always chasing something, thinking, okay, if I'm this perfect person and I look on the outside and I keep finding and do the things that Christ, like try to be like Christ, which can't happen, right? One of the things, but it's like, oh, He's already inside me. And I heard that verse there. We were talking, we were studying Galatians, and I believe it's Galatians 2:2 that we were talking about during that time. And it was just like, oh, you get it, right? And so that just has always been spot in my mind of like, he's already inside you. You just have to live that out, be that person. Cause he fully, like the day that you committed to him and he's already inside you. You can live and be Christ that way instead of being Christ, like, oh, trying to always attain, like, oh, I'm striving, I'm going to do this and I'm going to try to be like this. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, we should, right? We need to be good. But Colorado is definitely that place where I always go back and it's home. It's like camp from last week, it's just like, okay, this is where I find that peace and that comfort that God wants us to have. Yeah. So yeah, definitely a holy space.
Yeah. I don't think it's any coincidence, too, that a couple of us have mentioned camp, especially since yesterday was the Sunday that our kids got back from camp, kids and staff got back from camp. Mark, if you were to take a look at some of the places in your life that you would count as, holy spaces that have been meaningful to you throughout your walk and growth in Christ-likeness, what are maybe 2 or 3 of those places that you could kind of talk about and maybe share a little bit of insight into how God has been working with you through those things or in those places?
Yeah, I think for you and I both, growing up going to Fall Creek Falls for Bible camp, camp is one of the obvious places you think of. But something that I would encourage is that, especially as we become adults, it's kind of like most of us had that place where we first came to faith and say, that was a significant place for me. Something that I would kind of encourage is that for us, even as adults, maybe camp can't continue to be the space you go. Some people do go volunteer at camp every year. For some of us, that's no longer the thing that we get to do where we recharge ourselves. I'm a big advocate for trying to make some spaces in your life that are holy places, holy spaces. And it is the case that when you have a place you go to for the purpose of doing spiritual things, if you've made it that way the first time, it's actually easier to get back in that space, in your mind and in your heart the second and third and 15th time that you go there. So one direction I would encourage is that even as people tuning into this, it is possible to have, like Colorado or some beautiful scenic place that you go. There's no reason that your good holy space can't just be a particular chair in your house where you like to pray and look out the window. Like if you have the same space, and that's one of the things that kind of works for me right now. We've got a couch in our living room where I tend to wake up really early in the mornings, and I usually go and I sit there and read. Sometimes I wake up so early I may need to go back to sleep a little bit, and I might even doze off there. But trying to have some space that's easily accessible, I think, is valuable in cultivating your spiritual life on an ongoing basis. But I would also say it's great to have the practice of having those times away. And for me, one of the most significant places in Nashville, Mount Olivet Cemetery.
As soon as you said Nashville, because you've mentioned this before in different venues. Yeah.
So I
why a cemetery?
Well, so I was doing a half-day personal spiritual retreat, which I think every Christian ought to do from time to time. You really ought to take at least half a day and just go focus on you and God, date God, if that makes sense. And so I was trying to figure out places to go, and for whatever reason, I guess I had led some tours of Mount Olivet to show people like grave sites of restoration history leaders, like David Lipscomb is buried there, the Srigley's are buried there. And but I found in the back there is a Confederate cemetery. Like they've got this monument up there, there's all Confederate soldiers, and what I realized was if I'm looking for solitude where it's going to be just me and God, that's one place in the world, like those are the bad guys, right? Nobody mourns them, nobody goes to celebrate or visit them. Yeah. And it was a place that I could kind of have communion just with God and with nothing else. And there's a really large tree next to it that I would go to. And it's the first place where I ever tried praying for like 2 to 3 hours in a row, which if you've never tried it, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
But had some significant experiences while I was there that just kind of shaped me, informed me, and surprised me in some ways. Yeah. And so that place for me, I hardly ever get to go there anymore, since we moved here. But that is for me a place that I've told Carolina, hope I don't die anytime soon, but if I can get to Mount Olivet, that's where I'd love to be buried. That place has that much significance for me.
And again, emphasis, no rush. Right?
No rush. No rush. Yeah, not in a hurry on my way out. But so I would mention that. And since I've gotten to Texas, I've had 2 or 3 places that I've gone to, but I think living where we live so close to the beach, I've found that especially around September, October, like on a Tuesday morning when no tourists are there, like I've been able to go and have the beach to myself for 3 to 4 hours at a time out at the National Seashore.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah,
have
a
had
little bit farther south down the island, right?
Yeah, a little bit further away than the normal tourist spots, but I mean that is a touristy spot. But really, once everybody's back in school and it's still plenty warm down here, I think just finding places of solitude tends to be the way that I connect with God best.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that'd be a couple of places.
The cemetery is really interesting because, I mean, the symbolism of you are surrounded by death.
Yeah.
And yet you're still seeking God, the author of life. There's something kind of neat about that. Hopefully, you won't run into anybody like the Gerasene demoniac.
Right. I have had some really interesting squirrels pop by over there.
Interesting squirrels, is that what you said?
Yeah. But you know something interesting about that, and I could go on for 30 minutes about some of the tombstones and their inscriptions and things that I've read there. But
that'll be next episode.
But Bruce McClarty, when he was, I don't know if it was Cookville where he was ministering, but there was a point in time where he was preaching, and he needed just a place to study. It's really hard to find quiet spaces sometimes. And he had a person who offered him a room, and it was in the back part of like a funeral home. So he had this private room where he could go to prep and work on sermons, but every time he went, as he walked to the room where he was going to prepare to preach, it was just walls of caskets beside him.
Oh,
that may
that's
sound
unnerving.
that doesn't creep me out.
But so
I
how
think
do
we
you
have
get
to always keep death in front of us because it forms how you
That's
live.
fair. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Like the headspace. I don't know if I could concentrate on like what that is. That's different. Like how I'm sure we're all going to have like a different space, but that the cemetery is your place of solitude that you can find God. I'd be like, okay, God, I have a lot of questions right now.
Yeah.
Well, and circling back to what you said about spaces in your home, there's a book that Logan read and then she has invited me to read. It's called Ministry of Ordinary Places.
Yeah.
And it's been really cool just talking about everything in your house is an opportunity, right? Like a mug is an opportunity to share a drink, right? Like everything.
Washing the dishes is an opportunity to remember your baptism and being cleaned by God, right? Like anything, if you try, you can turn it into a spiritual discipline.
Absolutely. So I just think that's, it's timely for me.
Right.
And you said that Ministry of Ordinary Places?
I think it's spaces.
Ordinary Spaces. Okay. Yeah. Great. I just, as soon as you said the title, I was like, oh, well, yeah, of course, that makes sense. Yeah, definitely.
The book that got me thinking that direction was by Mark Thibodeau. It's called The Armchair Mystic. Yeah. And that's a great book on prayer.
Yeah, I like that. If there were ever a way to describe you to anybody, the Armchair Mystic.
I don't do much, and I sit around.
It just kind of sits there, and he's sort of weird. Well, Krystal, you had mentioned Colorado earlier, and for anybody who has ever even heard of Colorado, the mountains, unless you're in like the far east of Colorado, like, the mountains immediately come to mind. What was it about Colorado, or maybe a couple of other places?
Yeah,
that you can look back
like
to?
we said, I won't stick on Colorado. I think it's it's beautiful there. It was the mountains, but it was a camp experience. So I had all those other things that really worked into factor. Camp we just came off of that. We came off of building what the kids need, but also what some adults need, right? If you're going there, it's like if you're leaving off this hill with anything less, then like you just weren't in that right headspace. You weren't there because somebody has to be leaving with a little bit, just a little bit, and is exhausted, and our raspy voices and all of that might have been like cup is so full, like just like oh okay, they move through you, and so all camp experience gives that to you. Colorado is my place where it helped me, but worked that, and it was gorgeous, so it was easy. But Mark again, he encouraged me. I was struggling through some stuff, and really during like COVID too, like I have it, trying to keep spaces and trying to keep apart from everybody. But Adrian built me a swing outside, and I love it. It's so great. It's like out backyard, and it's like humidity. It's kind of, you can block out everything else. And he gave me these beads, and it became more intentional in that space for me to really concentrate, like not moving on until each thing that I've thought through. And so sometimes I'd make it through 6. Sometimes I'd make it through a lot faster. But that, as far as like my at-home space, I tend to, inside my house, I would love to be like the mug and trying to think with that, but I get into, I need to clean the dishes. I've got to make dinner. I've got to do this for the kids. And so for me, that space is definitely, I need to be outside because I don't do the lawn work and I don't do so that is easier for me. That is my space that goes within there. But as far as like another space that is just great is our mission trips have completely, being married to
The church mission trips.
Just the churches. That's something that Adrian, my husband, really introduced to me that I had never been. We got married and I went and lived in Brazil for a couple of months to get to know, like, why is this Brazil formed him, and I wanted that to be a part of our marriage and really understand. And that really changed like my prayer life and really focusing on like, okay, wow, like, we are blessed. Like, and you hear it all the time, and we tell our kids this, and in our ministries we're constantly telling them like, okay, and these things, but like to see it and live through it is just a completely different factor altogether of why it's so special, because you just it takes on you. It's the vision of going, oh wow, they don't have things, and some are so appreciative and some just don't know, and you get to introduce, and that's where God really works.
It's a good place to practice being the kind of person you ought to be all the time.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Something I was thinking about when you were talking about your swing, what do you guys think about the value of tech as it pertains to spiritual disciplines? Because I'm just thinking about the four of us, and I know we've all kind of taken different steps in different ways in dealing with tech and social media. It seems for me, my experience has been anytime I'm on my phone and there's notifications, there's just way too many rabbits for me to chase. And I know some people who say, I'm going to work on my prayer life, but I've got this super cool new religious app and I'm going to check my app all the time. And I don't want to be down on that, because I'm glad to see people use programming to the glory of God and apps to the glory of God. But for me personally, I kind of have to do it in a super low tech way for it to work. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Justin, we haven't heard from you yet, so what do you think?
I'm about ready to go. Yes, I use a prayer app by Shane Claiborne, but since I use it in the mornings, usually it's before notifications are really coming in, right? And so it's usually around 6:45 a.m. So no one's really reaching out to me yet. So I very rarely do I get any sort of notification during that time.
Now if I'm remembering, you don't have social media right now.
That's correct.
Right.
I technically still have a Facebook account that I use for the sake
Just
of
church stuff.
Yeah, but I deleted my Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok recently, and it's been really cool. So obviously less notifications coming in anyway. I guess.
That would be the big draw for me is what are all the things I need to check? Dopamine.
Yeah. Well, which granted, I'm still in 13 fantasy football leagues, so I'm still getting my share. Still getting my share, but but that prayer app has been and I have the book as well, but the accessibility to where packing wise, things like that. When I go to camp, I don't have to have, my bag was full, so I was able to just have my phone in the morning and wake up before the kids did, sit quietly in my bed, have that space still. So that's a prayer app I use, but I agree, like I can't, there's a midday prayer also in that app, and I can't do that. There's just no way at 12 when all the notifications are coming in, even without social media. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Krystal, you find it easier to unplug and connect?
100%. I can't. I've got my paper. I'm a big still, like I'll take notes on my phone, but then half the time I still end up going to just writing down everything. And there's something just peaceful and calming about writing the things down and studying and highlighting. And, we have more than one Bible. We've got our pretty little Bible that we got when we were married that we keep, and that we bring to church and stuff. And then we have our other ones where it's just like written over, right? Yep. Stuff that just really is meaningful to us. And so, the apps are great because you can highlight stuff, and there's places for that. But during that solitude, like when I really am studying, I can't use that.
Yeah. I heard a podcast a couple years ago from a blog because I didn't listen to the whole thing. I won't recommend it here just for the sake of safety, but the notion was this sort of return of analog.
Oh yeah.
And it was really cool to hear them talk about how like vinyl music is coming back, and people are finding that okay, Kindles are really convenient, and usually Kindle books are like on super sale for like 2 cents. You get this book, but there's something really gratifying about the physical medium there. It almost connects you more deeply in a way, and that's exactly how I feel when I like when I need to want to do some like really serious Bible study. Yeah, I've got my apps on my computer and all that stuff, but the times that I find most meaningful are when I can sit down with usually a Greek New Testament and a lexicon, and I can just hammer it out and really force myself to dig into this text and see all the little nuances and flip through things, and I happen to find something because, it's on the same page. Like, oh, well, that's an insight that's not necessarily relevant to this verse, but that does answer some question I had the other day about something else that I was kind of digging into. It's a delight to be connected, stuff like that. Mark, you look like you're about to jump in.
I don't need to go on too much of a tangent. I'm fascinated by the return of analog, and in some ways, I'm a participant in that. Yeah. I really enjoy the vinyl records and all that stuff.
Well, so a quick plug. I mean, this is a church podcast, so a quick plug. If you're able to, when we start up life groups in the fall, the vinyl music group had some. I heard a lot of praise for that. Folks were really.
It was a small group of us, but we really, really liked what we did.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
good connection. But what I was going to point out, I'm sure it wasn't the same thing you were listening to, but I came across something about how these days, like, we're in such a privileged world where technology now does so much for us that some of the things that people are now doing for fun, hobbies, special interests are the things that used to be relegated to servants because they were menial tasks. Like, people will now pay a lot of money to go with their friends to make candles.
Yeah.
Like 100 years ago, they'd be going, "What is wrong with you?" Nobody wants to do that. But it's amazing how the more that the technology and things in our lives have made a lot of the menial tasks easier, we miss out on something by always moving through the world so quickly and never having to touch the ground. Something about walking a mile on foot as opposed to riding 50 miles in the car.
Yeah.
You experience so much more of the world.
It's something different. The youth ministry intern is living with us for the summer, and when she got back, she was telling Linnea and I all about her time as a counselor at camp and everything. And one of the things she mentioned was how the kids in her cabin, how they were, for a while, for like the first half of the week, they were pretty consistently annoyed that she took up their phones. And it was so wild to me to even think, oh yeah, that is probably true these days. They would have their phones with them, even though these are middle schoolers. They would probably have their phones with them. And it got me thinking about, some of these places that we've been talking about, whether it's Brazil or Colorado or the cemetery down there, and just on the east side of Nashville. Justin, what are some places for you that did you like that segue?
Oh, that's great.
I brought it in.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned was it White River?
Yeah, it's kind of funny so I'm listening to y'all talk. I've been in Nashville and I've been over there. It's a beautiful part of the country. I've been to Colorado. It's a beautiful part of the country. White River Youth Camp is an hour east of Lubbock, Texas. It's definitely...
There's just something beautiful about West Texas.
There's something about
God's done something beautiful in that place.
Yes, there you go.
Mesquites and dead grass that can really bring God home.
It stirs the
The
soul.
dirt.
Yeah.
It's the dirt.
Honestly, though, that's actually, part of it. It's something about... I think it's just who's there, right? White River Youth Camp is a place where... at least for me, parents going through multiple divorces, home life isn't great for me. I mean, I've got people that love me, but it's just, they can't love each other type stuff. And so I get to go to camp for a week and just be a kid, that's devoted to God. Like, I was blessed with having a heart for God at a young age. And I think that's really cool. And White River really, really tuned that, right? I had adults that continued to pour into me. My youth minister was there, all my youth group friends, who I'm still friends with. Like, we still text all the time. My best friend was in my youth group. And the first place I got to do baptisms, of baptizing other people after I got baptized. So White River, I was a camper from 2004 through 2012, a counselor in 2013, a Bible teacher in 2014. I've done every single building out there except for the building they built 2 years ago, I've worked on. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's cool. I'm very grounded at that place. Yeah. And so, it's just funny to hear y'all talk about how, and I agree, Colorado has a place in my heart too. Yeah. I love that place versus, an hour east of Lubbock. It is not pretty. It's definitely not. And it's also funny to hear people at Camp Bandina complain about the heat. I'm like, that steady breeze we have, that's nice.
And the air conditioning in your cabins, which we
Yes.
never had.
Right.
You know?
The cabin's air conditioned at Bandina?
Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
yeah. At White River, you sleep in tents.
Yeah.
Like, it's primitive.
Some would say that's intense.
That's good. That's good.
So Father's Day was yesterday. The dad jokes are still strong.
That's
There you
right.
yeah.
And then the second place for me is just Marysville Church of Christ in Marysville, Ohio. The first place where I was the youth minister somewhere. So I took a chance on me. And then like a 22-year-old, getting to move across the country, not knowing anybody. And then meeting Logan after being there a couple months, marrying Logan there. And some people that she obviously considers family because they are, but me considering family because people that have let me into their lives deeply, very deeply. And so, Marysville Church of Christ and that's actually a really beautiful place. Their logo their little motto is actually where the grass is always greener. And they mean it. Marysville's a very, very pretty place. And so just the first time of actually taking on that ministry calling to the fullest extent, right, where I kind of have to answer for what happens fully. And also being able to, dive headfirst into the waters of marriage, right? And doing this thing.
That's pretty sobering on a couple of different fronts, right?
Yeah, it really is. Really very humbling, I think, is the word I like to use for my time in Marysville.
Yeah, very much so. Mark, you had already mentioned Fall Creek Falls State Park in Bledsoe County, Tennessee. I mean, if anybody knows Tennessee, it's like an hour south of Cookeville. So Fall Creek Falls was a special place because I only ever went there for camp until I got old enough to drive, and then I started thinking, well, I could just go there, and I would never just go by myself. I would take friends there, and I took friends there a couple of times, and it was such a treat. It was just so neat to be able to do all the hikes and see all the places, and I remember wanting my friends to experience it the way I experienced it.
Yeah.
It's like there's something special about this place. And one of the most meaningful times that I went was on October 15th, 2011, when I proposed to Linnea at Fall Creek Falls State Park. Because that place there was a place where I began to grow and mature and become. It kind of set me on the trajectory of becoming sensitive enough to God's call in my life to where I would eventually find myself in the other sacred place that I wanted to mention, which is not nearly as exciting as Colorado or Brazil or even a cemetery, because at least you're outside, right? And you said you had some interesting squirrels.
But more exciting than an hour east of
Lubbock. I'm
Lubbock.
actually going to say probably not as exciting as an hour east of Lubbock. It was my study carol at school in my doctoral program. So if you're watching on online, this little space behind the desk where Justin and I is, we're in my office, this little space behind it, I had a space that was kind of like this size. And the books that you see behind me and then some that are behind the cameras, all those are kind of shoved into like two bookshelves and up on top of a shelf and around and on the floor and stuff. That space was where I learned how to be dedicated to something difficult. Like there are difficult parts of marriage, but for the most part, marriage has been really fun for me and Linnea, and we're very fortunate that we get along super well. We were really good friends, really best friends, before we ended up getting married. But like before we even had some kind of a romantic attachment as well to each other. So that was marriage for us has been largely, I don't want to say easy because I don't want to make light of the difficulties, but we've been friends for a very long time. When I was in my study carol, though, I had to learn how to commit to something that wasn't always as what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't always as fun. It wasn't always as interactive. Gratifying. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, it wasn't always as gratifying. I learned how to discipline myself and just sit down and do the thing that I needed to do. And it was, the result was churning out a dissertation. in the amount of time that I wanted to finish, because I didn't want to, I didn't want to just stay in dissertation limbo forever. I mean, you've written a dissertation before. You know that it can't just sit there unless you're disciplined and you work at it. And the discipline was, that time in that study carrel was a culmination of years of failures in college and grad school. Had a professor of mine in spring of 2010. So like I was right near the end of my Master's of Science in Education. And I thought I needed to take a class with him and over the summer, which was going to be a pretty hefty class. It was going to be an independent study with him. And he called me into his office like, "Hey, Kevin, you haven't turned in this big portfolio." I was like, "What big portfolio?"
Oh, no.
So we started talking about it, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess I should probably read the syllabus. I'm an adult now." So I asked him, like, what grade would I get in the class if I don't turn this in? It's like, "You'll get a C." It's like, "Oh, okay. I'll just take the C." And then that's when I started talking with him about taking this class. I was like, "Hey, Dr. Klein, I think I need to take this class with you." And he told me straight up, "Kevin, I am unwilling to commit to working with you when you've shown that you are unwilling to finish work to which you've committed."
Wow.
And that stung. That hit hard, because I thought the world of this guy. Brilliant, a great lecturer, hilarious, incredibly intelligent. Like he to me was all the things that I wanted to be if I was going to be doing what he was doing. And to hear him say that absolutely cut to the core.
Yeah.
But that was precisely what I needed, because I needed to learn how to be disciplined in the way that he was wanting me to be disciplined, to not squander whatever gifts or potential or whatever he saw in me. And so that study carrel up there at Asbury Theological Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky, a bustling metropolis of 2 stoplights and a gas station, I learned, or maybe that lesson that Dr. Klein gave me all those years ago culminated in kind of that moment. Something that we have all noticed, or maybe it's something that we've all kind of hinted at, but maybe not explicitly said here, was this. All the spaces that we've mentioned, Jesus makes the space significant. Colorado is beautiful. Brazil is attractively dangerous. It's like, like that stuff like that. But like, there's a rugged beauty in even West Texas, right?
Amen.
But it's not just the fact that you were doing nice things, or you were learning about mission trips, or you were enjoying nature, or I was producing something that I felt was worthwhile at the time. It was the fact that Jesus makes those spaces significant. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I affirm the statement.
Right. Yeah. So it's like Jesus is what makes all things significant, right? And so it should be no different with the spaces, And I think any event that we've gone through that we can tie the emotions and the thoughts, or even the reactions that we experience in that place, if we can tie that back into our Christian walk, we're going to grow more from it. We're going to learn from that. We're going to become more in tune, more in love with Jesus the Christ anyway. So I think that's actually a spiritual discipline, is taking the time to reflect on why is this important to me, and what more can I get from that, and to me, what parts of White River Youth Camp in West Texas can be here, what are the parallels there? And the first one is Jesus, right? God, omnipresent, right? And so engaging in that discipline, I think, is just really important and really gratifying.
Yeah.
When we invite God into the spaces and into the experiences, nothing is ever wasted.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right? If God's part of it and I'm choosing to let him form me through it, good or bad, what I wanted or what I hated, God can be praised as a result of it happening.
It's still gospel, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Guys, really appreciate y'all's time. We hope that this is something that we can do with some regularity, but I think that this has been a really a real treat for us. And I think the takeaway lesson is Jesus is what makes this space significant. Seeking Jesus wherever we are can bless any place and can bless any person that we happen to find ourselves with. So, all right.
Thanks, Kev.
Yeah, this is good.
Y'all take care.